Assalamu alaikum. I'm Elizabeth Vasquez, the CEO and co-founder of WeConnect International. It's really an honor to be with all of you, your highnesses, your excellencies, honorable guests. Thank you to our organizers, NAMA, UN Women, and sponsors P&G, Procter & Gamble. This is really an exciting time to be together to discuss inclusive sourcing or gender-responsive procurement. I think we have a slide with a little bit of history on some of the corporations that are already actively leveraging their purchasing power with women-owned businesses. These are corporations that are committed to looking for women-owned businesses and other diverse suppliers in their global value chain, and to making sure they have an equal opportunity to compete and win their business. I want to make sure that all of you know that there is an app that you can download. I think there should be a slide on the app. Just want to make sure that you know that you've received a link. It's for a poll to be able to go to Hello Crowd, whether it's the App Store or it might be on your Android. But if you go in and you select the Women's Economic Empowerment Global Summit and then enable the app, allow it onto your phone, and then go through agenda by picking the time of the session, and then choose panel 2 and just make sure that you've booked it. If you do all of that, you'll be able to take a live poll, and we have a question at the beginning of the panel, so I just want to make sure that you're able to participate in the poll because your voice matters. If you don't know already, this session is focused on industry leaders supporting gender-responsive procurement. It'll showcase commitments, experiences, good practices within the private and public sector on gender-responsive procurement and other relevant policies supporting entrepreneurs and women business owners. As all of you know, corporations are uniquely positioned to promote gender equality and empower in their workplaces, empower women in their communities, and through their purchasing policies and practices. The sheer size and volume of corporate purchasing power means that corporations have the power to dramatically influence the way suppliers and supply chains work to make them more inclusive. To put it into perspective, about 63% of the top 175 global economic entities, and that includes state or national governments, are corporations and not countries, based on annual GDP. Each year, corporations spend trillions of dollars acquiring goods and services, and yet purchases from women-owned businesses by large corporations and by governments still remains at about 1% of the total. So corporations like this that represent over $1 trillion in annual purchasing power, 1% is about $10 billion. We need to all work together to move the needle to get from 1% to 2%. But that means we have to find women who can supply $10 billion worth of products and services. And then once we know how to get to 2%, we can get to 3, and to 4, and to 5, and to get closer to 50. So it's an exciting time to be a woman-owned business. And this is important. You'll hear from the corporations about why they want to be inclusive in their sourcing practices. Yes, there are fantastic social benefits, but at the end of the day, this is really a business imperative. So it's really my honor to introduce to the stage a panel of true experts in this space. First, I'd like to welcome my friend Andy Butler, who's the Global Supplier Citizen Lead at Procter & Gamble. I'd like to invite Javette Hines, who's the Senior Vice President for Supply Chain Development, Inclusion, and Sustainability at Citi. SN Nayak, who's the Senior Research Fellow at UCLA. And Dr. Shema Nawaf Al-Fawaz, who is the owner of Gossip. Please help me welcome these expert panel members. Before we get started, maybe Andy, could you tell me a little bit more about yourself and what you're doing at Procter & Gamble to source from women-owned businesses?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Elizabeth. It's great to be here with you, with the panel, and with everyone in the room to be part of this conversation that needs to continue to grow and advance. My name is Andy Butler. I have the privilege, as Elizabeth said, of leading the Supplier Citizenship Program at Procter & Gamble. And what that means is this. At P&G, we're a corporate company based in the United States in Cincinnati, Ohio, that makes branded consumer products across the globe, hopefully many of which you've already used today and will continue to use throughout the day. And about a year ago, we declared a corporate agenda that we call citizenship. It's basically our declaration. We believe it's both a business imperative and a responsibility to be good corporate citizens by focusing in 5 key areas where we feel we can make a meaningful difference internally and externally: environmental sustainability, diversity and inclusion, gender equality, ethics and corporate responsibility, and community impact. So my role is, how do we drive those 5 priority areas, our corporate citizenship agenda, with and through our 50,000 global suppliers?
Super impressive, Andy. Just curious, Javette, how similar is that at Citi?
Actually, Elizabeth, very similar. For the city, we've had a supplier diversity program actually in place since 1977. So 40 years for that. But what we've done over the past 8 to 9 years is to really incorporate sustainability as a part of that program. So therefore, we went through a rebranding exercise similar to P&G, where in 2016, we changed it simply from supplier diversity to supply chain development, inclusion, and sustainability for a couple of reasons. One, because we were really contemplating the fact that we're a global bank, so therefore we really need to think about our diversity and inclusion efforts from a global perspective. But the other piece of that, because sustainability was already a part of our practice, and because we already were in a very close relationship with our corporate sustainability and citizenship team, as well as with our environmental social risk management team, really putting that as a part of our overall title and perspective. From a sustainability perspective, as Citi, is not just about the environmental contemplation, but also the human rights and labor law consideration, as well as diversity. So for us, very similar in nature. And the key thing, of course, is the collaboration and partnership that also goes with that responsibility.
Very interesting. Thank you, Javette. And SN, that's an interesting first name. Is that what you prefer?
That is right.
I love it. Okay, tell us a little bit about what it stands for, and tell us about your work. I know you've been deeply engaged in these issues, public sector, private sector, in Africa in particular. Would love to learn more.
Right. I am primarily a researcher. I started being interested in procurement as a graduate student, but there was really nothing written about it, on the continent. So I ended up writing a dissertation about history, right? But by the time I was finishing, procurement was booming, talks about reform, et cetera, et cetera. So I have been kind of tracking that history of reform, tackling substantive questions of gender equality. Is this really making a difference from the perspective of women and small businesses in Africa? So I'm broadly interested in the political economy of development. I would like to think that public-private partnership is, in my view, one of the key sectors of growth and development today. So it is crucial for women to be involved and to benefit from it. Thank you.
Fascinating. Dr. Shema Fawaz, what do you prefer we refer to you as?
No, Shema's fine.
Shema? Okay, she's amazing. I got to talk with her earlier, and just so accessible, given everything you've done in the public sector, private sector, your own business, quite a trailblazer. Tell us a little bit about your business at Gossip.
Well, I founded a company called Gossip, and it's an Emirati brand. The pillars of our company is to take our Emirati-inspired cultures and values and instill them in a homegrown company that is ready to go internationally and globally. We have 3 different arms within F&B, brand consultancy, and now we've recently launched our own events arm. And we're more looking forward into how to incorporate businesses that when they go outside the UAE kind of have our touch. So, you kind of feel a little bit of home when you travel. I think you've seen a lot of businesses like this when you travel and you kind of find the familiarity and you kind of go straight to them. So that was kind of one of our pillars. We're very interested in sustainability. We try to use everything from local farmers and organic as possible. And we're certainly, after being in this forum, we're very inspired to look into increasing more into social entrepreneurship and women involvement.
So impressive. She's being very modest, but it's really exciting what you're doing with your business based on years of experience in many sectors. So we're talking about gender-responsive procurement. UN Women has written an amazing report. I hope you'll take a look at it. It's a wonderful resource about how to do this. But let's go to the basics. How would each of you define a woman-owned business? I think a sole proprietor is kind of obvious, right? If she owns and runs the company, but when she starts to grow, how do we define a woman-owned business, Andy?
For us, it starts with a company that is at least 51% owned and operated by a woman or a group of women. And there's a couple, I think, important things in there. We talk about owned and operated. Ownership is obviously key, but the operation element is also important. And we see this in the United States, but we also see it across the globe, that we want to ensure, if we're really being serious about gender equality, ensuring that companies are also not just owned but operated by the women, because they're able to influence things like the company direction, innovation, which drives some of the business value that we'll talk a little bit about in this panel as well. And then we also get into the need for certification and verification as well. And I'm sure we'll talk that throughout the discussion today. That's where great partnerships with organizations like yours, Elizabeth, and We Connect International can really help us ensure that these companies we're working with are meeting the spirit and the intent of supplier diversity and gender equality as well.
Interesting. Javette, similar or different?
Very similar to Procter & Gamble, of course. Taking a look at 51% ownership, operation, management, and control, that's very important to us. And that's the key thing in terms of trying to understand if a woman does really own her business. The other piece of that, and where it's very important, is that ensuring that women-owned businesses have the opportunity for capacity building and understanding organizations such as We Connect International and or other organizations that we also support that focus on inclusion, diversity, and capacity building generally. So yes, very similar in terms of how we look at it, and then making sure that the information that is provided to us is in fact accurate.
Interesting. So these tend to be somewhat universal definitions used by corporations. All of you have a presence in over 100 countries. But to make this make sense, is this accurate? I want to know what your thoughts are on for Africa in particular, SN. Does this make sense, or would you have a different?
That's a very interesting question, because as far as I know, there is no country in Africa that has tackled that problem. When you look at legislation where it mentions women, they may say women's business, or women-led business, or women-owned business. But what does it mean policy-wise? It is a serious problem, and it leads to issues such as fronting, where sometimes because there is a tender and people want to bid, they may promote a woman, for the circumstance, but really there is no real control yet. So it is a huge area of policy that needs to be worked on.
Interesting. And Shema, does this make sense? I mean, there's so many family-owned businesses here in the UAE and in the Middle East in general. Does defining what is a woman-owned business, is that important? Or would there be multiple definitions? What are your thoughts?
I think it's important. I mean, internationally, it's 51% to be an owner. However, we have a lot of family-owned daughters that are going to inherit their parents' businesses, and these are divided between Sharia law. So you'll find, a brother and 2-3 other females that are shareholders, which is very interesting, which can actually be lower than 51%. But in my definition, as long as a woman owns a share in that business, from my perspective, it should be considered a woman-based company, and should be even given the same kind of benefits towards women procurement and supply chain to any company, especially in our country. And we have a different structure because a lot of ladies work in government and they have businesses on the side. And in that perspective, they may not be able to fully operate a business or to be even a 51% shareholder. So I wouldn't like to see them kind of lose out on this based on either their job that they're doing or if they're taking care of a family.
So maybe it depends on what are the intentions of the initiative. If it's training for women who own some of the business, then everyone should have equal opportunity. But maybe for the corporations that want to make sure if they're going to go out of their way to source from women, that they're actually sourcing from women. But there might need to be a range of definitions for different situations and in different locations. So that's very interesting. I just want to move it. I want to talk about solutions, but I know before you get to jump into solutions, you have to talk about some of the challenges. So would love to know, as a woman-owned business, what are some of the top challenges you have faced or other women-owned businesses in the UAE or in the region or maybe globally have faced in trying to go after larger contracts, procurement opportunities as a woman-owned business?
I think there's several factors that a lot of women face, especially in supply chain, for example, is knowing about the contracts. You need to have a network. A lot of them, we don't have a centralized system where you can go and, get into the database and figure out what are the contracts that are out there and which ones can you bid for. That would be a really great help to have something like that. The other thing is networking and knowing the people. So even if you're going to go in a company, people usually give contracts to someone that they're more familiar with, someone that you can, go out and dine them and build a relationship. A lot of contracts aren't just based on submitting your proposal. There's a lot of things that come through that. Culturally, within UAE, it wasn't the norm for women to be out there. I just came back from an entrepreneurship forum in Finland, and they use the word hustle if you're in entrepreneurship. So you have to go and meet people and mingle and do a lot of different things that normally was not something that was in a place for a woman to do. Things are changing now. Women are going out and they are hustling a lot and they're trying to get into businesses. However, to get this, you also need, access to capital, you need access to confidence. Women in general that I see lack confidence where their male counterparts have more confidence, yet they're maybe less qualified as a woman. So a woman is more likely to second guess herself, where men are more likely to say, let's just do it. And then in that sense, you have a lot of women that are losing out within supply chains or going after, the big contracts.
That's interesting. I was just in the Netherlands and someone made the point that men tend to go after what they want and women tend to go after what they need. And so that can have huge implications for what you ask for in access to finance, in the type of training, in the type of networks. So I think that's really interesting that you have a similar perspective. And just curious, SN, does this make sense from an African context? Do you have the same challenges or completely different challenges with women that want to get into procurement, supply chain opportunities?
Well, things are changing since at least 1990s. A lot of countries now are trying to have a centralized database for procurement, and a lot of it is actually online. So the knowledge gap is being shrunk. But the issue here is actually finding women who can deliver. What happened was that procurement was, I would say, monopolized basically by men after 1990. There is this push to liberalize, to make it more competitive, to make it more accessible to women. But in which sector? What you then find out is that sectors that bring real money, construction industry, for God's sake, the development projects, a lot of them are going into, let's say, health, construction industry and things like that, well, you don't have women represented there. So it's okay if you want to supply paper clips, the traditional usual services, catering, whatever, but I think the real challenge is how to make women move into different sectors at the same time, and that takes more than just advertising a tender. It takes real policy that train women, encourage them to become successful entrepreneurs.
So do you think that's a huge stretch, or do you think it's a pivot to get them to take what they're passionate about, what they're good at, and pivot from maybe designing dresses to designing uniforms where they can sell at scale? Is it that simple, or is it more complicated?
I think it is more complicated than that. Just because information about procurement is more available doesn't mean it is simple. So what you find out is you have more steps, for bidding for large contracts, and that doesn't help small businesses. Now, if we're talking about global big companies, that is one thing. But in developing countries, if you really want to talk about procurement, public procurement might be one way to boost women's income, to bring in more entrepreneurs. Then you make information not just available, but the issue is to simplify the steps so that it is not going to discourage a woman who, let's say, was sewing and getting used to selling whichever product she's making to the government or to the UN or whichever agency is there, and make it actually more exciting and easy to make that that shift that you're suggesting. So that is also a problem.
I guess for Javette and Andy, I'm curious your perspective sort of from the other side. You have good intentions. You want to buy more from diverse suppliers, women-owned, ethnically diverse, people with disabilities, LGBT-owned businesses. What are some of the challenges in sourcing from underutilized suppliers? Maybe Javette, what's sort of the top couple of things that you find?
I think some of the points that both have made, actually, it is one, access, but not just access to capital. It's access to opportunities and understanding what the opportunities are. I found the biggest barriers to really be an understanding of what is supply chain management and what is strategic sourcing.
Right.
So let's just say you do have a wonderful business. That business may not necessarily be a fit for one particular corporation, but it could be beneficial for another, or even another woman-owned business as an example. But there has to be a clear understanding of, from a supply chain management perspective, where does what I do fit into the category that is being sourced? So what is City looking to purchase? What is P&G looking to purchase? If it's uniforms that I make, if I do make soap at home or oils, is that something that can be utilized? Can that something that can be distributed? If it is that I am in construction, right? Is this a company that has many branches, or is there a facilities management? So really understanding what is the service that you provide and where does it fit from a procurement perspective relative to a corporation or even another small business. I think the information is key, because then understanding that, but then once you understand where you fit, how do you develop your own strategy for understanding? How do you do business with someone else? How do you then focus on access to capital? What is the learning that you need to have to continue to take your business to the next level? And that is when, earlier I mentioned partnership and collaboration. I think the opportunity last year to work with the UN Women with the procurement guide serves to kind of like help with some of that, having a real guide that can be utilized across the globe. But that's the service that you also provide from a We Connect perspective, and then Andy and I as peers who are able to engage and share best practices about collaboration, about partnership, how to better support women-owned businesses, particularly and especially in developing countries.
So that was an amazing partnership. UN Women collaborating with Citi to share with the whole world best practices and being inclusive in how to do that. But again, it's not easy, right? So Andy, what are some of the challenges, especially as it relates to sourcing from women-owned businesses that you've found?
I agree completely with the comments that Dr. Shaman and Javette made about access, and I won't necessarily continue to harp on those because I think the great points have been made, but just to reinforce, that is a big one, and I think having collaborations, again, Javette, to your point like this, help us break down that particular barrier. I think another one that's really important to call out and just face head on is unconscious bias that still exists within our organizations. And I use the term unconscious bias because we may, to your point earlier, Elizabeth, have the best intentions and believe in supplier diversity, to believe in gender equality, want to make the right decisions. But there are still reasons out there, there are unconscious reasons, things that have maybe built up over time that cause people, whether they're in a leadership position, whether they're in a buyer position, to not maybe provide that opportunity, to not seek to understand the capabilities that a women-owned business might provide. And this is where the roles of folks like Javette and I and our peers become so critical, to be able to help provide the education, provide the access, facilitate discussions in a different way, to be able to break down some of those barriers at first in a tactical way, but also to instill some of that different thinking, to replace that unconscious bias with something that really is more inclusive, like the conversation we're having today.
Fantastic. So I'm curious if we're able to show the results of the poll. So I asked all of you to download the app so that you could participate in the poll and ask a question. I'm going to see if the organizers are able to bring up the results of that poll, because it asked you a question about your sourcing practices and how easy or difficult it is to be able to, let's see, so the question was, am I more likely to buy from the following vendor? Am I more likely to buy from a male-owned business, a female-owned business, or did you have no preference? Curious if we have the results of that poll. Results say, wow, for this audience. Okay, so to be clear, this is very unusual. I don't think this is statistically normal in most of the audiences that I've had the pleasure of talking with. So congratulations. This is a very gender-aware, gender-sensitive group. The fact that you are actually conscious of leveraging your purchasing power with women-owned businesses is the first step to having an impact. And I know that, Shema, this is something that you believe in. We had a conversation earlier about this. What are your thoughts about the results of this? And what do you think is the potential if we all had a consciousness of how we spend our money?
I think this is really exciting because this really shows UAE's vision towards women actually being realized. I mean, they've done a lot of good work, and we have 8 ministers, we have 9 people on the FNC, we have a woman heading the Federal National Cabinet. So UAE's been working a lot towards actually empowering women. And probably the next step is, and what they're doing really well, is empowering entrepreneurship. And what I think a summit like this is now talking about empowering entrepreneurship for women specifically, because when you want to go into supply chain, when you want to go into this, you want to actually be able to be ready to take these bids and close on these deals. And it shows what I've noticed in my business. When I first opened, I was pretty scared. I didn't know if people would come or people would want. I'm not an international brand. I'm going to be competing with the likes of well-known brands like Starbucks and international blockbusters. And would someone come, and would people want to support you? You're a woman in the end, and you have that glitz and glam of international. And I was floored and surprised that my main supporters were women, and were local women, and honestly as well men. And I kind of think I'm grateful to the people of UAE, because they were the first people to come, to buy, to say, okay, that's great. And you'll find that women, especially in business and in government in the United Arab Emirates, are more likely to support other women. They're more likely to tell you, call me, let me help you, send me this. Men that are within the field of supports, like we have different funds like Khalifa Fund, MBR Foundation, Shira, will actually push you towards, here, meet X, they can help you. So I think this shows the realization of a vision in UAE, and I'm not sure if this poll will ever replicate anywhere else. And I also think most of the people that voted were women, so thank you.
Good for you. I mean, think about it, right? We're half the world's population. If we decided tomorrow to spend at least some of our money with other women, that's literally trillions of dollars in impact every year. So it's very real. But we can't do it alone, right? We need public-private partnerships. We need civil society. So, Shema, maybe before I go on to ask others about this concept of how do we build an ecosystem, what's the role of government as opposed to the role of the private sector, of corporations and of civil society? How do you see all of that working towards a world where women have an equal opportunity to compete and win business? It's not set-asides, it's not quotas, it's just an equal opportunity to compete. What would that look like?
I think UAE government has done a great role for women in government. You can see that in position and placement. And now the next step is towards women in business. And the best way to do this is replicate what we did in the government sector, which is bring in, first of all, policies that, incentivize people to work with women companies, bring in the legal framework for it. Now we're starting taxations. Incentivizes can come through tax cuts. Next, you can actually build in government-based associations where women in the private sector can still be in contact with government sector companies, and they can be aware of them so they can actually procure to them. The other thing is having a database where all procurement of all companies can be sourced in one place, and there's a percentage that women can get. So, for example, if you're a company that wants to bid for a huge I think they do this in the US, for a huge military contract, 1% should be owned by a woman. You have to come up in a consortium of 3-4 companies that has to bid for it, and I think that's a really great idea for UAE, for businesses that are not ramped up to the stage they need to be, but can kind of get exposure and learn, and by then they can be fully legitimate and fully big enough to support such big supply chain requirements.
I like that value chain approach and being realistic about where women are today, but where their potential is if they're brought into the value chain. And I'm just curious, SN, are there any good models out of Africa that you've seen where public sector, private sector, civil society have worked together and started to have an impact, or is it very early days?
I would say things are nascent and just growing. But I want to return to the poll. What it shows that women are not just entrepreneurs, they are consumers. And I think that to the private sector, it really builds a case to say, well, you have to know your customers. And in the context of public procurement, your customer is not the state as this abstract entity. Your customer is actually the end user. And when you look at all of these emerging markets, well, women are in great numbers. And really leveraging that or thinking about ways of changing language about public procurement is really important in the context of Africa, to the extent that people have started talking about it. It comes as preferential schemes or quotas, etc. And that language in of itself is problematic to some people, because some people think, well, these are social handouts, for example. But it doesn't need to be that way. I don't know if I'm mistaken, but in the list of companies that you showed us, I don't think the World Bank was there, or I could be mistaken.
Did
but
you say World Bank?
Was there the World Bank among the consortium?
Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's to be announced. It hasn't been made public yet, so
Okay. Because that is, I would say, a key player really in bridging the public and the private because of the hybrid nature of that institution. And when you think about Latin America or Africa or Southeast Asia, it's an entity that has a lot of influence. So I would say one of the key things really is to try to change the language internationally. And that institution to me is key in helping those countries, opening up those markets, and making sure that practices are actually fair, but also actually helping women as consumers, but also as entrepreneurs. Yeah.
Super, super interesting. So Javette, I know a lot of the corporate executives that we work with want the government to be more involved and support this movement that I feel the corporations have really led to be inclusive in your sourcing practices without really very many governments requiring it at all anywhere in the world, encouraging it in certain places, South Africa, the US, and a few other markets. But what do you think would be the ideal role of governments to make it easier for you to be more inclusive in your sourcing practices?
I think from a governmental perspective, really just being more clear about policies that focus on inclusion in different areas, and also providing more training. Because again, I think if there's at least at a minimum, if you're not going to have a policy immediately, put the appropriate training in place that talks about what supply chain opportunities might exist in a region, and take the time to talk about what's necessary in order for a business to grow and develop to that $10 million business or that $50 million business, and then what else is unnecessary or necessary for that business in terms of access to capital once they get it, how do they maintain it, how does a woman-owned business, once they grow and develop, what are their own policies and practices they want to have in place, so that as they grow and develop, then the government creates more of an opportunity to do business with them as this corporation. So I think for corporations, a couple things. One, put in proper practices and policies in place, but then two, put the appropriate education and training in place too, so that we can work more in concert and partnership with that. And then I think from a corporate perspective, it's also up to us not to just wait on the government. We have to be more definitive about which particular countries we actually operate in, identify within our own sourcing practices what the opportunities are that might exist. And then I think the point that Andy made also earlier is to be candid with you. Also be truthful about our own biases that might exist within our sourcing practices. I think we have to touch bases and understand what we're doing there, identify that, then we can more specifically also align with the governmental practices depending on the regions in which we're involved.
So that's actually an interesting point, because when I first started working with all these corporations, I thought, well, why are you keeping these women out? They have all this amazing innovation and they can create jobs and deliver solutions. But what I've found in reality is that generally speaking, the women of the world aren't knocking on your doors. They don't even try to compete for your business. They don't participate in the RFPs and the RFQs or of governments. Government procurement is somehow something that we tend to shy away from, and I'm generalizing. But Andy, is that something you're finding, and how do you address that? How do you let women know we are open for business, and how would you work with government to help get that word out?
It's definitely something we see, and I agree with the comments that have already been made. If I think about what does the ideal partnership look like, to your point, Just add on to what's already been said. I think one of them is exactly this point of helping to amplify awareness. Even if you look at a networking opportunity or an event like this and being able to bring these different organizations together and people who are here that might have normally gone to a corporate event but wouldn't necessarily engage with the public sector and vice versa. I think that amplification of awareness is a really key thing. One thing I also think that's important is aggregation of demand. And so we talked about the role of corporations in buying from women-owned businesses and governments as well. When you start to aggregate that demand and create opportunities for women-owned businesses to say, hey, I can continue to grow in both the public and private sector, and that gives me the opportunity to invest, to take some more risks. Those opportunities have to be out there to be able to help make that kind of supply and demand linkage. But I think the other important point that's been made by pretty much everyone is really leveraging strengths. And SN, I think you made a really good point of this in terms of, hey, some of these corporations are very consumer-facing. How do we bring our strengths together? You said a really important word, Elizabeth, which is ecosystems. And there's a few of us in the room that had a conversation around this at dinner last evening, of really leveraging the power of each individual. We're a consumer-facing company that makes consumer products. If I look at Javette, Citi is a bank, and they're involved in a lot of things from a financial standpoint. How can organizations like ours come together, along with many others in the room, to be able to do things that we are uniquely good at, to be able to elevate everyone?
And I'd like to elaborate on that a little bit too. So also, even as I think about this great opportunity here for women, right? How wonderful would it be that all of the women here who actually currently own businesses and or are thinking about it, I'm assuming there's a list where you know what business is represented here, talking about the whole ecosystem. Which business may be more in construction, which business may be more in advertising and marketing, which business may be more in software, and try to understand, and as you go to these different events, begin to create your own kind of network and ecosystem where you know one another, where you might have the opportunity to bid with one another, where you may have the opportunity to develop best practices, but really sharing that information and utilizing the opportunity to grow with one another, to enhance and uplift one another, as well as continue to engage with us. And from a governmental perspective, I think when you work in tandem that way, that's the way that we're going to continue economic empowerment and growth from a global perspective.
So collaboration, ecosystem approach. How many of you in the audience are women-owned businesses? Who owns a, ooh, okay, so you're in the right room. There's a lot of businesses here. We should all be doing business with all of you. Hopefully you brought lots of business cards. We have about 30 minutes left. I'm going to ask one more question that's more focused on sort of what next, but then I want to ask all of you, what are your questions? What are your comments? How do we create some urgency, some momentum to get more money into the hands of women as fast as possible so that they can invest in their families and their communities and create wealth and opportunity? So I want you to think about that. I'm going to, like I said, ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask all of you, and don't be shy, because I will call on you. I will absolutely ask you to come up with a question. So would love your thoughts. Maybe we'll start with you, Shema. What are the one or two recommendations to move this forward in a really powerful way? What could women-owned businesses do, or what could corporates do, or what could governments do? What actions could we take to have an impact?
Looking at this, I think there's several ways you can kind of tackle this. One way is, and I believe this summit is part of it, is for government intervention, where policies, legal frameworks are actually put in place to push women in the business front. The other thing is, I think it's also something that women should be responsible of. As you said, 20 trillion US spending is in women's hand. 80% of the household spending is in women. We make 51, in UAE, we're 59% of the labor force. I mean, it's our decisions to take, and we can decide to choose that we are going to go with women suppliers. Having said that, I find most of my suppliers within I don't want to call it, more of the, if you're looking into advertising, if you're looking into PR, if you're looking into marketing, you'll find a lot of women suppliers, and I make a choice consciously to work with females. Maybe because I think they're better, but okay. So I pick them specifically for that reason, and I think they excel there. But when I go into packaging, when I go into supply, when I go into manufacturing, I don't find female women. And one of the things that entrepreneurs in UAE were discussing is, where are they? Is there a place I can find them? So I can type in, for example, whatever I'm looking for. If I'm doing manufacturing and F&B equipment, is there a place where I can go and prefer to work with women? So I think it's also up to us to make these conscious decisions, because the more you support a women-led business, the more you give them the possibility to grow. And women-led businesses contribute up to 20% of the GDP. They actually create jobs instead of taking jobs. So the more you support them, the more they can grow, the more they can give. And innovation is very important. And since your consumers are women, who better to innovate to you than consumers? I mean, we do focus-led groups all the time to figure out what consumers want. Well, the consumer is there, and when they go into a business, women tend to go into a business for a need. There's something in the market, I would like to fix it. So, I mean, I think a lot of women businesses have started this way, and a lot of them have been very, very successful.
So I think you made a really important point that we're already powerful. We just have to recognize it, and then we have to use it. We have to leverage it. And it's not to the exclusion of men, right? You said women have 20 trillion in purchasing power or influence. So even if it's 10%, that's 2 trillion into the hands of women. But that still leaves another 18 trillion for men. So we're not taking away from the men. We're just saying, how do we create opportunity for everyone? So I really appreciate what you're saying in terms of having a consciousness and creating an equal opportunity for people to win your business. And SN, what are your thoughts, words of wisdom on what we could do to make a difference?
I think moving forward, my thoughts are that I think UN Women can play a critical role as a convening body, but also as a space where, a place where we can start the conversation about data. One of the things that we don't have, although we know why women should be doing more in procurement, we don't have enough data. We just don't. So how do we produce data that facilitate the conversation globally? And I think this is perhaps one thing that UN Women should be looking at. The other thing I would suggest is a skill transfer. You know, I think there is a lot that women from the Global South can learn from women elsewhere or from corporate businesses, and thinking about that, you know, investing in those skills, or how one could strategically invest in those skills with the intention of ripping something out of it a few years later, is, I think, one way to move forward in a very practical way.
Yeah, I do love the idea, Sen, of having UN Women having that platform to bring the public sector, private sector, civil society to share that information and make sure then we action it, we do something with it. And I know Citi, I mean, you're a data-driven organization. You know, what are your thoughts on concrete actions? Because yes, we want to leverage purchasing power, but we have to create that enabling environment. We have to make sure the women are ready. So what are your thoughts, Javette?
So just to that point, from a data-driven perspective, when women are successful, we have to begin to share that information. Even from an internal perspective at Citi, we have multiple people working on women's initiatives. We have multiple people working on citizenship. But that does nothing for us as a corporation if we're not creating awareness about what we're each doing and communicating that to people so we can tell one story. Similar to the way corporations each year have their annual report or citizenship report as we do, a woman-owned business should begin to do the same thing with your business. Each year, mark down and start to write about what it is you've been successful in, how you've created cost savings, as an example. What are the policies you have in place where you've empowered women yourself within your firm? What are things that you may do as a part of your business from a citizenship perspective where you are bridging the gap for young women who are following behind you to go to the next level? When corporations are able to see that data, when you also see it for yourself, that's the thing that continues to drive you and to fuel your energy and your own economic empowerment. That's a critical piece right there. The other thing is, I would say, take a look at some of the corporations you might be interested in or other small businesses. Take a look at citizenship reports or annual reports that corporations put on the web. There you'll get some sense of what we might be looking for. And it may not be the corporation that you're going to do business with, but you get some ideas of how to, one, formulate your own approach, 2, figure out what they may be spending their dollars on most, and depending on the country, where that may make sense for you. And then try to think about, what's my goal for myself in terms of leveraging that information. And then earlier we mentioned the UN procurement guide. Too often we put information out there all the time, but we never read some of these things. Take a look at those things and see which part of it you can put into practice. It won't be every single thing, but just which components, when you give yourself a goal of a 3 to 5 year approach, how do you utilize that information and that data to build and sustain your own business? And then for us city, because we have been so tied to the UN Women, as well as the Global Compact, we're talking about 2030 and sustainable development goals. What's critical from a data perspective there is not just looking at the 17 goals as 17 goals, but which ones are applicable to you. Start to focus on that, start to leverage that information, share that data, because sustainability is very important to corporations, and the more that you can share about how you're improving your business and how you're able to drive change there, the better opportunity you also create for yourself that way. So data-driven for sure, but utilize that data in a way that benefits you, and take information from other people so that you're not reinventing the wheel, but you're actually utilizing it in a better way to propel yourself and others that follow behind you.
Wow, Javette, those are a lot of really important suggestions that run a gamut of opportunity and challenges. Andy, we haven't really spoken specifically to what you think corporations could do to help be a part of the solution.
Sure.
I just would love your thoughts on how many corporations are in the room that represent larger? Okay, so there are a lot. What words of wisdom would you share with them based on your experience in this space?
This is going to build directly on Javette's point, but we need to continue to sharpen and articulate the business case for this work. And so we're doing, I think, a better job of that now than we have historically, but it has to continue. So if I look at it from a P&G standpoint, the premise from a gender equality standpoint for us is, to your point around this isn't taken away from men, we believe a gender equal world is a better world for everyone. Now, when I look at our supplier diversity strategy at P&G, it's predicated on 3 very simple concepts: win internally, win externally, and win with employees. Now that's a little bit corporate speak, so what does that mean? When I say win internally, and Dr. Shame, this comes back to your point a bit about why you intentionally work with women, we have data that clearly indicates that when we work with women-owned businesses, they actually perform better than the average. Happy to talk about that in more detail with anyone who's interested, but we do a rigorous supplier performance assessment of our top suppliers, and that data shows that our certified women-owned businesses perform better than the average. That is a clear business rationale for winning internally. Winning externally, that then gets into the storytelling aspect, being able to grow brand equity, being able to grow consumers, being able to grow wealth in communities that can then buy our products. That's a very clear business case as well. And then the win with employees piece for us, we have 95,000 global employees. Many of you in the room have even more than that when I look around at some of the corporations that I see here. How do we help engage them in this? Because this is now something that we can give to our organization as a chance for them to be able to, through the platform of working for a company like P&G, have a positive impact on the world, have a positive impact on their families and their livelihoods, in addition to just earning a paycheck and earning a salary. So having that clear strategy, but with the mindset of continuing to sharpen and articulate the business case is, I think, the biggest thing we can do as corporations.
So that's really powerful, because we've been emphasizing having, how do we leverage our purchasing power with women-owned businesses? Because right now they're pretty much invisible in our value chains. But how do we also invest in or buy from the corporations that make a commitment to buying from women-owned businesses? How do we make a point of doing business in countries that have made a clear commitment to an inclusive economy and an inclusive society, and spend our time and our money in those countries and with those organizations that are making those commitments? So now's the time where I get to pick. You can raise your hand, or you can wait for me to pick on you. And I think we have a couple of mics. I don't see the person walking around with the mics, but I was told, oh, fantastic. Okay, so we have a couple of mics. So don't be shy. Today is not a day to be shy. You want to network. You want everyone to know who you are and what you do, especially if you're a business owner or if you're a corporation looking for suppliers or a government official who's proud of the work you do. So let me see some hands. Great. We have one here. Hi. We'll start with this question. And then any other questions so I know to come to you? Okay, right in the back.
Very brave.
Hi,
Hi, Elizabeth. My name is Luna Shamshudoa. I'm from Bangladesh. And I have been in the procurement space, government procurement space, for nearly 14 years now. And I find most of these conversation kind of, I like to see more women in this space, in the procurement space, in the public procurement space, because government does most procurement. Honestly speaking, it is about 70% of the GDP growth wherever in each country is procured by the government. And that is where I am. I do bid for jobs, not only in Bangladesh, but also in other countries too. And I've failed many times too. So that is where it is. I think that one of the challenges that women face is certainly networking or knowing about access to information about procurement. And the other thing is, I feel that it is not only women-led business, but SMEs are facing the same problem. And how to get them on board is looking at, I have been lead in many of these bids, in overseas as well, in different countries. I've bid in Bolivia, sitting in Bangladesh, with a Bolivian company. I've bid in Kenya, I've bid in other countries. I am now I'm working in 2 countries on electronic government procurement system that my company builds. And we've rolled it out in Bangladesh very successfully. And also I'm in Bhutan, and I'm stepping into other 2 countries as well. I think what women should do is probably gather reference, gather experience, and probably work as subcontractors before they can step out and be the lead partner. There are many challenges, but once you have your experience and your knowledge and know-how, people would be chasing you. I mean, there's no reason for us to be sitting there and not be part of the bigger pie that the government is spending. And I don't know what your thoughts are. Most of you are from the corporates. But another information I'd like to also impart is that most government are now reforming their procurement rules. And nowhere I have seen, I have worked in many countries, but nowhere I've seen that have barred women from participating in these bids. Of course, there are framework issues, but quotas are something that I don't think it would take us anywhere. We'll probably be in the same place. So this is from where I come from, where I have been experiencing. I've worked 15, this is my 15th year in public procurement space. And I see that we need to start small, maybe as subcontractors, and then move on, be part of the consortium. And I guess once we get experience, we would be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership and what you've done in public procurement, not only selling to governments, but setting up systems on procurement and making it more transparent, making it more accessible, and in that process, identifying opportunities for being more inclusive. Would love your thoughts on that from anyone on the panel, but let me just take one other question. I think we had one right in the middle. I don't know where the microphone went. Super.
A big thanks to all the panelists. In the procurement chain structure, we entrepreneurs face the challenge today is the right pricing vis-a-vis the payment terms, keeping that in mind. My question is, what would you advise to be at par with the giant procurement companies that already exist? Collaborations was one which Dr. Shaima mentioned. Thanks for that. But what else would you recommend so that we can be up there? Thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like there's some real interest in understanding, okay, this is all great, but now how do we do this? How do you find out how these companies source, what they source, who are their prime suppliers so you could be a subcontractor? There's a hunger for, once you get inspired, to actually do it. So maybe we'll start with you. You've been successful in working with governments and with corporations and with consumers. How did you figure it out?
Well, I came from a government sector.
Shema.
Yeah, sorry. I came from a government sector, so I was a VP at Mubadala Healthcare, and then I was working in DIFC. So I keep always updated on what are the government initiatives that are coming out, what are the government entities, and I actually go meet with them. So I make it a point to be proactive, and I go and meet every single entity and tell them about my business and see what are they doing within my sector, and if there are any opportunities to collaborate with them, if not now, in the near future. And we make sure we sign up on their, a lot of these companies have, you have to sign up so you can become a person that they can actually send you bids when they come your way. So we make sure we do that, so we're aware whenever anything comes up within their supply chain that they send it to Gossip if it's relevant for our business practices.
I'm just curious, SN, that this issue of quotas keeps coming up, or set-asides. I mean, maybe we support it, maybe we don't, but you do have to have a baseline, and you do have to set goals if you want to change something. So what are your perspectives on setting goals as opposed to set-asides and quotas, and your thoughts on how we can make this the most effective?
I think I'm in favor of setting goals as opposed to quotas. And I want to say that it is, in my opinion, we don't need to say we don't want women to bid. But it is important to say we want women. You know, so the comment was there is no place where women are actually barred from bidding. But it is important that public policy be conscious of the fact that we want to do something for women. I mean, after all, we are here because we recognize there is a problem, right? There is a problem in terms of access to the market, in terms of our purchasing power, et cetera, et cetera. So when public policies start naming things, women, entrepreneurship, opportunity, 30%, 1%, 2%, I think that is something that happens there. I do agree, and I think I said that before, that for countries such as Bangladesh or African countries or Latin America, we're really talking about small businesses, middle-sized businesses that are the engine of growth. And really, I agree with the comment that until we figure out how to harness that purchasing power, we're going to have a longer problem. So let's say in Kenya, for example, the law gives women 30% of all government contracts. Yeah, well, that is written on paper. It doesn't mean that a lot of thought was put into that number. So you then have a number with no actual result. And sometimes these are just things done for political goal or campaign, right? I still favor naming women consciously. I think setting up goals and mobilizing both the international and the domestic constituencies to really understand we are in the business of bettering women's lives. But the set-asides and the quotas, I don't think they work anyway. They don't.
So Javette, curious on your thoughts on that, but also this idea of second tier or of subcontracting, you know, women in the value chain. So most women of the world who own businesses can probably not sell directly to you as a prime supplier. What is Citi doing to look at the value chain approach, second tier suppliers and suppliers who sell to your prime suppliers? Is that an effective strategy?
Actually, it does and it doesn't, right? Because I think for us, we do have very specific goals in place. So as it relates to Tier 2, to try to meet some of the Tier 2 requirements, we have language in the contracts. Now, to be candid, there are certainly those times when we may have someone that comes to us and they want an exception, where they want to take that language out of the contract, where they don't want to report to us, or where they tell us they don't have a program. And for me, I'm very, very limited in terms of letting that happen, because you may not have a program today when the salesperson is winning that contract, but you just might the next year. If I let you out of that contract altogether and say that you don't have to provide second tier to me, but then all of a sudden you hire someone from a supplier diversity, I may go 2 to 3 years without understanding what impact you could have made by subcontracting some portion of Citigroup's business. So for me, at a minimum, we may say that you can report twice a year versus every quarter. But right now, we have language in our contracts that suggests that there should be a percentage, but it's not a guaranteed percentage for anyone that does business with Citi to attempt to subcontract some portion of that business to a diverse firm. Not a mandatory requirement, but the reporting, we do require the reporting ideally every quarter, but in some cases it may only be twice a year. In terms of first tier, the only way that we can continue to increase our growth, or the only way we could have made a pledge this morning that says we're going to get to 100 million, is to actually put a goal in place and to hold people accountable. So we can't talk about it and then not say specifically, okay, from a supply chain perspective, now how are we going to do that? What is going to be the goal in doing that? And then it's not even the supply chain. We then have to work internally with our lines of business, who for us sometimes do make decisions. And the same thing, what are the goals that we have in place? How is it that it relates to, Andy made the point earlier, from a workforce diversity perspective, those same people who are leading their affinity groups, so if they're leading the women's initiative within the city, the Black initiative, et cetera, they're also business leaders. So I need them to talk about how, from a goal perspective, they can help us. I think for women, the opportunity does not always have to come second tier. You still could be a small business, and you might actually be able to do business with a city or Procter & Gamble, or even Wells Fargo. It really depends on the actual opportunity. The opportunity depends on your ability and capacity to do business with us. So it doesn't have to be limited to second tier, but second tier should always be an option. And then regarding payment terms, that certainly can be a challenge. From a payment term perspective, typically we don't limit the payment term. It's the same for everyone. But that is where we were having this conversation last night, and maybe Andy talked further, and Jamila and his team is pushing that too, talking about supply chain finance and then how we can help push one another. We are a bank, but there may be things that if our partners or our customers or any suppliers might push us to do from a sales perspective in order for us to do business with them, that may allow us to be a little bit better perhaps when it comes to certain payment terms. But that really comes again from that whole partnership discussion. How do we leverage what we're trying to do as it relates to diversity and inclusion from a business perspective to make us also accountable as well? So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Andy, do you have something similar to what Javette just said, which is, I think, that when you have contracts, yes, you want diverse suppliers to win as a prime, but you also are asking your primes how much of this contract is going to go to other diverse suppliers. Is that's that ripple effect of you all asking all of your top suppliers from anywhere, based anywhere in the world, could have such a massive impact because their biggest customers are then forced to start thinking about, well, how much of this contract is going to go to women-owned businesses? Yeah. So Andy, is that something that you all do, or what's the potential of that?
It is similar to Citi. It's something that's in all of our contracts. It's something that we very closely enforce and that we believe in. There's a balance here because it's not a replacement for doing business directly with women-owned businesses, as Javette mentioned. But I'll tell you that for us, it's something that we have invested a lot of time and effort in. And I love the comment that you made earlier about subcontracting, because it is a great place to start. And it's a great place for us to be able to continue to grow the value and impact of supplier diversity. And there are some ways we do that. I think one of the really important things for all of us to do, whether you're public, private, women-owned business, any part of this ecosystem that we're creating, is leverage existing platforms. What I mean by that is this is a platform. This is a place for all of us to come together. And so how do we leverage platforms and experiences like this to be able to create those connections? We just had a big supplier diversity event that I keep referencing this, but Jet and I work very closely together in the US that we were both at in the United States. And at that particular event, we brought about 30 of our majority-owned suppliers, our prime suppliers, whatever term you want to use, and helped them facilitate about 150 meetings with prospective diverse suppliers in their areas of need. And so maybe a company that can't do business with a P&G can do business with one of them. Even at this event, we have a number of partners that Jamila, who was mentioned earlier in our team, invited to be here with us. Peter here from Accenture and a number of others in the room that I haven't had a chance to connect with today, who are here, who have their own programs, but if we can all come together and help drive that accountability amongst our companies, that's how we're going to be able to drive the subcontracting second-tier piece of it.
And if I could, Elizabeth, I think the other key thing, I think what's also key to the point you just made, Andy, I forgot. So P&G, as an example, that very conference that we both attended, we had an international day. We use that as an opportunity because this organization is National Minority Supplier Development Council. Elizabeth is We Connect International. What we're trying to do is tie together the whole purpose of what we're all about, creating opportunities and global awareness. So on that particular day, there was a delegation from MSD UK, from the UK, from South Africa, from Canada, and Australia. Oops, sorry. Utilizing utilizing these kinds of forums as an opportunity to, when you learn about these kinds of organizations, when you learn about these different delegations, how do you become a part of that? How do you also get that information? How do you, as Andy said, leverage that platform so that you're getting the information that you need, that additional sauce to kind of really, kind of stir the pot for you and make it a good meal for you and for your family.
That's exciting. All right, so we have 4 minutes. Yes, question here and then question here, just brief questions, and then we'll do brief responses. We have one right in front, and then one in the middle back. So brave.
Hello. My question is based on your comment in the beginning about the wants, men and women, and the wants and needs. I read somewhere a statistic that around 2% only of women-owned businesses go over $1 million. So I think there is something psychological, or maybe you can comment on that. That is a reason for that. So maybe they don't want to, venture in these things. I don't know. So if you can comment on it, please.
It's a fair question. Why aren't we growing? That's a really good question. So I'll ask the panel. We have one more question in the back middle. He's bringing a mic right now. Another brave leader.
Hi, my name is Helen, and I'm the CEO of a youth entrepreneurship organization, BizWorld. And one of the things, it's actually in line with what she was saying, one of the things that we discount is the fact that women maybe don't have enough confidence. Because technically, the skills are there, and there aren't enough people being mentored. So there aren't enough people that are showing that women can lead, that women can be in positions that can actually go into procurement, that can actually have leadership roles, because not enough women are showing themselves. I'm a very, very simple example. I don't really do as much as the media will say that I do. And it's just because I'm someone that goes out and speaks. But not enough women speak, and not enough women have confidence, and not enough women mentor women that give them the confidence to be able to have the courage to do these things and to actually go into bids that are bigger than them. And that, to me, I feel is one of the biggest reasons why we are where we are today.
All right, so the women business owners in this audience, you got to stand up and tell your story. You got to step into that power and be proud of it and not be shy. So 30 seconds, each of you, words of wisdom, parting thoughts, next steps. I'll let you jump in. You can say what you want. Those are great questions.
No, great. Sorry, I just wanted to reply to your comment real quick. A lot of women have a problem with scale. Once you get to a certain level and you want to scale and you need more funding, it's not available unless you have collateral or something else. When you go to VC firms, they either want majority of shares where they end up controlling your business and you're not willing to give it. So I think for women specifically, there's a challenge when you start up a business, but then there's a challenge when you want to go into scale, and that requires funding and infrastructure, and there's a huge risk taken there, because what if you scale and you don't get enough contracts as you'd like? So there's a problem. I think a lot of now entities in UAE are tackling this for startups and entrepreneurship, is when you get to that level and you want to go into scale, how do you do it in a safe environment where we don't have bankruptcy laws in UAE? So if you default, it's not something that you would you take lightly. So I think that's a very good point that should have been mentioned. From my perspective, I just think you should keep trying and going at it. I think women should support each other, but I do believe in quotas, and I think governments are responsible to put in quotas and hold private companies and government companies to these. It's great to talk, it's great to get awareness, but if you want change and you want quick change, this is part of government role. Governments are here to benefit people of the countries that they are, I can't find the word, I'm sorry. They're supposed to benefit their countries, and one of the ways you benefit is you increase GDP, and you do that by supporting women, and it's not by just setting goals, it's by holding people accountable and liable and making sure it's incentivized. And 34% profitability increase when people use women in their supply chain just because of innovation. So the facts and numbers are there. Now we need action, and action comes, in my opinion, top down. And I would like to see that you need to have an X percentage from women businesses. I know it's difficult, you have to search for them, it takes more effort. I think that's one of the barriers, is you have to do more work to find a woman-sourced businesses than not. And I think it's time, and UAE specifically is ready for this. So I'm really excited for the next years to come.
Great points. Thank you, Shima.
I will just add that as far as public procurement is concerned, I think building women's confidence starts with getting involved in shaping legislation from day one. It is very hard sometimes when you have laws in place and you're trying to undo them. And I think what women should be doing is to really looking at, what is happening in terms of laws and policies, and how can they actively influence that and start voicing the concerns at that level.
Time is actually up. So I would just say we know there are academic institutions that are here. I think academic institutions can really serve a great purpose with respect to leadership and development training and mentorship. So I know UCLA is here. There may be local universities. So contemplate that as a role in terms of supplier diversity and inclusiveness and really shaping the leadership as well as scalability.
Thank you, Javette. Andy?
And also knowing that our time is up. These, I think, are two great questions. I'd actually love to go a bit deeper on them. I'll be back here. P&G has a booth. Our whole team will be there. And I'd love to actually engage in that dialogue a bit more with both of you if you're able to today. But I'll just end by saying that for us, and I think a lot of us on the panel and a lot of us in the room believe that when our supply network reflects the diversity of our consumers, of our employees, and of all of our stakeholders, we believe fundamentally that our business grows and our community thrives. I probably don't need to convince anyone in this room of that, but to Javette's earlier point, we need to continue to communicate that message and help more people understand that. And so I tremendously appreciate the opportunity for us to have this discussion today and to continue to get that story out there.
Well, on behalf of everyone at We Connect International and NAMA and UN Women and the other organizers, please help me thank this amazing panel of experts.